Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Streaming with Jess and Julia. I'm Jess.
And I'm Julia. So, after our long hiatus, we want to thank everyone for being so patient. Jess went out for a pack of cigarettes last June, and she's finally back. So, we're going to have a serious talk about this off mic later on. But for now, we're both so happy to be chatting with you again.
Thank you, Julia, for so graciously welcoming me back into the apartment.
You're welcome.
On a more serious note, we've had a pretty intense few months of school, and now we're getting ready to graduate in a couple of months. We really appreciate everyone who's taken the time to listen, and we're so excited to keep making content for you.
And if anyone wants to offer us a job,
please.
We'll graciously accept. So tonight we're going to try to dig into some of the dream sequences that appear throughout Babylon Berlin and extract some information to tide us over until we get more news about Season 4. Dreams are obviously a key element of the series, and we're going to try to explore some of the different ways they can be interpreted.
Dreams are always a really fascinating addition to TV shows, especially ones with so much mystery and intrigue like this one. I think a lot of people find them confusing, but they really serve an important function in certain types of stories. They're usually used to say something about a character that they would never reveal out loud on their own. I think it helps to sort of think about them in the way that you think about your own dreams, as a mix of subconscious desires and fears, as well as a reflection of your emotional state.
Right, and I probably won't make this comparison again, but in this way, Babylon Berlin is kind of similar to The Sopranos, because the dream sequences are there to pry open the mind of a very closed-off and unstable character. And especially this kind of character, men who live in a world where there are negative consequences to expressing themselves and their fears and desires. So whether that's 2000s New Jersey or 1920s Berlin. We're also going to talk about one of Helga's dreams. And I think the one thread linking the dreams for the characters is they're all prevented from fully accepting and expressing their emotions in everyday life, but in different ways. And Helga is very difficult to read, and we know a lot less about her backstory than we do Garian's. So her subconscious is especially valuable to filling in some of the blanks in her character.
The dream where Helga and Garion dance together in episode 11 is one of my personal favorite scenes, and a really good example of how dream sequences need to be interpreted in a variety of ways.
That was an iconic scene. It was nice to see the Helga Bot 3000 let loose a little bit.
We're going to focus a little more on the plot-focused dreams, but here's a quick analysis of the dance scene, which I think is important given the amount of screen time that the writers devote to it.
It's actually Helga's dream, not Garian's, which is interesting because Helga's motivations are very unclear sometimes, and I had actually remembered it as being Garian's dream.
So clearly this dream has a purpose, because even some of the seemingly inconsequential camera shots are there to underscore something that the audience may have overlooked, or to more literally highlight the overarching themes without giving the characters any kind of awkward expository dialogue.
The dance scene is there, I think, for that reason, because when you see Helga and Garion together, they have very kind of repressed, unnatural affect to them, and it emphasizes exactly what's missing between them, like that joy and excitement, and maybe what Helga subconsciously desires or believes about their relationship.
Yeah, I think it represents something that she would never actually expect or ask him for out loud. The writers present it as a dream in order to reveal what those desires are without her having to explicitly say it.
And I think we can also connect that scene to two other dance scenes, which is Garion and Charlotte dancing at Hollander in Season 1, Episode 5, and then Garion dancing with Helga at a bar in the same episode as the dance dream later that night.
I was very let down when Garion and Helga were actually dancing in real life. It was kind of a disappointment.
I know, because Garion normally slays the dance floor. It's one of the rare things he actually enjoys without guilt, but Helga's never really seen that side of him.
Oh, yeah. It's a little bit misleading, actually, because the dream comes so early on in the relationship that we've barely seen them interact. However, from what we have seen of their dynamic when they're apart, the lighthearted tone is very far removed from the reality of the relationship, which is subdued, to say the least.
We could interpret that as maybe Helga's subconscious belief or hope that moving to Berlin is the cure for the fundamental darkness in their relationship. And it's very telling that as soon as Helga wakes up from the dream, it's cut to more, it's interrupting her and Garion's romantic moment. and, finally getting the proof he needs that they are a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious subtext is that a genuinely joyful relationship can't be based on this sort of trauma and emotional codependency and deceit. And Morris represents the gulf between Helga's desires in her dream and reality.
We really could talk about the sequence for the whole episode, probably, but let's move on and talk about some of Garion's dreams.
So Garion is one of the most repressed characters I've ever seen. The
Yeah.
dreams that tackle subjects like lust, love, fear, and guilt are really important windows for the audience to understand his psyche while his guard is down, while he's sleeping, and to peek into his Catholic guilt. He can't use sketchy injections and alcohol to suppress his emotions in his sleep.
That's a good way to look at it. They provide us the necessary context to read Garion's actions and emotions in his daily life more accurately, even more so than some of the other characters.
A good example of this is one of my favorite sequences, the flashback with Helga and Garion in the laundry room at his childhood home. Garion has this dream while he's on the spy plane with Graf after they take aerial photographs of the Black Reichswehr training sites in Russia.
Can you imagine how absolutely terrifying it would be to fly on a plane in the 1920s?
It's terrifying now.
In addition to flying over enemy territory for a sensitive spy mission, this is to Garion what it might be like for one of us to go to space with Jeff Bezos.
No thanks. Yes, and he's looking out the window of the plane at the sky, which for him is clearly a very surreal, sublime experience, as it would be expected, like you explained. There's something really humbling about being at the mercy of all of these massive forces, whether they're human-made or natural, and maybe that reflects the way a child, especially an emotionally isolated, ashamed child, would feel about life.
Before we get more into the analysis, let me recap the dream. Basically, we see a third-person scene of Garion watching his younger self at age 16 or 17, and he's in the laundry room of his childhood home in Cologne. Young Garion is kissing Helga, who also looks younger in the scene, which we see because of her hairstyle and clothes, and as she pulls away, we see that she's pregnant. She says something along the lines of, "I've made my choice," and then walks over to a figure in a military uniform behind some of the hanging linens, who is revealed to be Anno. She turns back to young Garion, looks at him, and then walks away with Anno. Adult Garion watches this and looks heartbroken.
So the big question about this, for me, was how much of this reflects reality and how much is fantasy. I think we both tend to fall on the metaphor side of things, where this is a condensed sequence, maybe showing events that occurred over months or years, but more in an emotionally realistic way than actually showing a true flashback.
Yeah, I think that's true. The Helga, Garion, Anno triangle is really Garion's central internal conflict. It's also something that he's too embarrassed to talk about out loud, which is why we see it manifested in his dreams.
The way that Helga is portrayed in this dream, and just generally in the whole show, is extremely wishy-washy. She's leading him on. It's a reflection of probably how Garion saw the situation, mixed in with some of her actual behavior. So we know she's not afraid to jump ship to find something more promising, but I'm not really convinced that she just, they were together and she left him high and dry after such a great love affair.
I read some reviews of this episode, and some people said they thought this dream meant that Garion is actually Moritz's father. I don't know if I really agree with that. I think the fact that she's pregnant is more so speaking to the fact that at this point she's unattainable.
Yes, I think we're on the same page about this, because Garion might see Helga as inherently sexually linked to his brother, or be envious that Anna was able to express his claim to her in a very prominent public way. But Garion has to either hide their relationship entirely or hide the origins of it. And so it's an expression of that rather than any sort of hint that he's Moritz's father.
Also, considering the fact that Moritz is taller than both Helga and Garion at age 12, I'm going to assume that Anna was his real father. Also, Garion was just about 16 when Moritz was conceived.
Beyond that, it would kind of just be a strange and meaningless subplot, because how would anybody even prove this paternity case? There's no DNA, there's no Maury show.
Yeah, Julia's helpfully written hysterical laughter onto our notes here. Do you think we should get, an applause sign for the apartment so you could just, let me know when I'm supposed to laugh at your jokes?
You'll know.
Okay.
I think one interpretation is that Garion is questioning the narrative his own mind constructed about this period of time as an adult. So he's had some distance from Helga while he's in Berlin, and even though by this episode she's now living with him again, we can see that they're not really open with one another about big or little things, and he doesn't truly trust Helga. He's always essentially withholding something of himself for fear of judgment or rejection.
I think it's also fascinating that this dream is followed very quickly by the scene of Garion and Graf almost falling out of a plane, which is a very obviously life threatening situation. But when Garion gets home, he tells Helga where he went and that he flew in a plane, but nothing about why.
I feel like I would push back on that and I'd be like, no, 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 like you flew to Russia. Tell me more about
Yeah.
this.
Well, Garion and Helga haven't always had a super warm and communicative relationship, but a near death situation is something pretty significant. Yet there's this newfound lack of trust. And even if he can't tell her the details of the secret mission, there's no reason that this detail needs to be kept secret. Yet he doesn't even mention it. So I wonder if this experience is one of the breaking points for Garion regarding their relationship.
So the dream is both a pseudo flashback and metaphorical foreshadowing. So it's a corner piece in the 1,000 piece Garion puzzle.
I like that analogy.
So in episode 11, Garion hallucinates or dreams a version of the night that he murdered Father Joseph after being drugged at a bar by the Armenians' henchmen. He has this dream right after Helga tells him that he's no longer between us. Anno is no longer between us. So Garion imagines waking up next to her, but with his hands covered in cement, and when he gets up, he starts remembering the events of that night. So we see a back and forth sequence of Garion in his pajamas, panicking and sweating, and him that night vomiting and stumbling away from Father Joseph.
This scene has a lot of quick cuts and really shaky camera movements, too.
The dream continues, and Garion remembers shooting Father Joseph and burying him in wet concrete. And then the camera cuts back to him in Walter's house, where Garion sees Moritz sitting at the kitchen table, staring at him while holding Walter's gun. And Garion watches him with a really sad look on his face until Moritz gets up and walks away.
There are a lot of things being conveyed to us in this dream. This is also in the same episode where Moritz catches Helga and Garion together in bed.
Agreed, and I think Moritz represents a few things here. Anno and the guilt that Garion feels about him, the potential consequences that Garion and Helga could face for their relationship now that Moritz knows, and in terms of foreshadowing, just the violent future that's ahead of the characters, specifically Moritz, because in later seasons we find out that he's joining the Nazi party.
It's really the gun and the expression on Moritz's face that makes the scene very meaningful and so impactful. I mean, Garion imagines Moritz looking at him with disdain, probably because that's how Garion views himself. Their interactions in real life don't really reflect this dream dynamic, even though Moritz is still kind of angry about Garion and Helga's affair.
Yes, because Garion is still an authority figure to Moritz. Like when he yells at him earlier in this episode while they're sitting together at breakfast, he kind of shuts down Moritz's complaints about Garion and Helga's relationship. But I think inside he feels like he, on some level, deserves Moritz's anger and hatred because he feels responsible that his father is gone.
I think it's also interesting that this dream, which is part of the hallucination about Father Joseph, is stitched together with this vision of Moritz.
It didn't really come to me exactly why they're together, but I think there has to be some significance.
Well, I think there's a unifying theme of guilt, as well as, facing the bad things that you've done in your past.
I think that makes sense. In the first part of the dream, he's trying to outrun this person who's chasing him. And in the second, he's facing his fear of being rejected by a more innocent stand-in for his brother. And in terms of the gun, belonging to Bruno, I think, is maybe a hint to the audience that Bruno is going to be a more dangerous character than we at first expected. I've actually heard some German viewers say that he commonly plays a villain on German TV. So it's a little bit of like dramatic irony for American viewers versus German viewers. But I think the reason that Moritz is holding a gun is because he is sort of puncturing Garion's carefully constructed facade about his life and like the secrets that he's built up around him. And also maybe indicating that this character is going to pose a direct threat to Garion later down the line. So I think there's sort of two layers of interpretations. One that's about Bruno, who is the real owner of the gun, and one that's about Moritz's character and how it's going to develop as he gets older.
Another scene that a lot of fans appeared to be talking about, but we actually weren't sure if we wanted to discuss, since we couldn't decide if it was a dream or a hallucination, is the final scene of season 3. Garion walks through the bank in kind of a fugue state. There's chaos and death occurring all around him, which I think brings up some memories about the atrocities of war. The most significant part about this scene, however, is the last shot, where Garion emerges from the bank, looks down at the sewer grate.
The same sewer grate that he goes to therapy in.
Oh, right. Then what he sees is a scaly green monster.
We both sort of agreed that this hallucination has a very obvious meaning and purpose in the story, which is to show us that we ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get worse. Garion survives walking through a major bank in a major global finance center on the worst day in financial history, and then he walks outside, and whatever is growing in the Berlin sewer system is far worse than anything any of these characters can imagine. And also maybe there's the idea that Garion is capable of seeing the danger that's lurking underneath the surface, but he's like brushing it aside or intentionally pulling the wool over his own eyes.
That's definitely hinted at. I think Garion tends to kind of ignore the very obvious extremism that's becoming a very serious threat to the system that he values.
He encourages Moritz to go on the Nazi camping trip.
Yeah.
So.
But of course, we can't exactly blame him for not having the same wisdom of a century of history that we have today.
We actually had a lot of back and forth about what exactly counted as a dream versus a drug hallucination versus a vision. But regardless, since we're watching a very carefully designed TV show, all of these glimpses into the subconscious lives of the characters are crucial. They're all very distinct, tightly packaged scenes that are designed to give us a window that we otherwise wouldn't have.
Especially with an ensemble cast where we need to keep up with the lives and stories of so many different characters.
The pharmacist, the pharmacist's assistant.
Oh my gosh, yeah, there's a lot. But this is kind of a shorthand way to explain why a character is making certain decisions or behaving in a certain way. This is the writer's way of exposing the subtext behind each of the characters' true objective without having them actually announce it on screen. What this does is it provides more nuance and creates this overarching dramatic irony where we learn things about certain characters that the other characters will never know.
And I think Babylon Berlin does a really good job of assuming that they have a smart and insightful audience. So things are typically not over-explained, and sometimes that means that you watch something and you have to watch it a few times to kind of understand what is happening in the story. But they allow you to sort of draw your own conclusions, and you have to watch carefully to understand different characters' states of mind, because they don't typically say these things the way that people don't in everyday speech. They don't typically just, soliloquy their feelings. And also, I mean, the dreams are a godsend during the 2.5-year season gaps, because you can go back and rewatch them and mine them for a lot of meaning. I think they're supposed to have a lot of different interpretations and to be sort of a direct line between the creator and the audience to encourage the viewer to consider the show's underlying messages and connect with its themes.
That's certainly what we've been doing for the past couple of months since the show has kind of been on a hiatus, just watching certain scenes over and over and over again and seeing what new interpretations we can draw. I think we're going to end this episode here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Recording this episode was a lot of fun after such a long break.
Sabbatical.
Yeah.
Thank you for staying up with us, and we'll see you next time.